Hello, I want you to look at this video of an altercation in Macy's. It's gone pretty well viral. The young black man, and I'm referring to him specifically as black for a reason. His name is Demir Palmer and he's just 18 years old, and he's beating up this sales assistant. And he said he was doing that because his brother, who was actually doing the filming, by the way, had told him that the sales assistant had used the N-word in reference to him. So this chap simply exploded with rage. He said something like, "I couldn't help myself. I was so angry. What else did I have to do?" Yeah, I think that's what he said. He simply attacked the assistant without even asking him whether he had actually used a racial slur, or indeed why, if he had. If I were in a shop and someone told me that a sales assistant had called me, I don't know what, that bloody cow, or even worse, that bloody white cow, it would not have occurred to me to go and beat the sales assistant up. You might say I'm a small woman and I wouldn't accost a larger person, perhaps not, but even if the assistant had been smaller than myself, it wouldn't have occurred to me to punch her. I might have not done anything at all, or depending on the circumstances, I might have actually gone over and asked her what she'd said, but I wouldn't have gone straight over and decked her. There are occasions when it might be appropriate to get involved in fisticuffs, but being told by a third party about a nasty name isn't an appropriate occasion. Okay, so that's the first thing. Now I want you to look at this. Don't be fooled by the word security on that guy's t-shirt, by the way. He's one of the Black Lives Matter mob, which caused the man to crash his truck in the first place. And then when his truck had come to rest against a lamppost or something, the group pulled him out, roughed him up. They were rifling through his belongings while he was in a dazed condition on the tarmac, and then one and only one of them went over and did this to him. I want you to consider the fury with which this attacker did that deed. You see, it was totally pointless. The man was already incapacitated, but you can see that what he did came from a sort of a simmering rage. Most of us know enough about cooking to know that you can have something, bubbling along just below boiling point, behaving itself for quite a while, and then you throw in a small extra something and suddenly you have a boil over. Well, that guy who threw the kick, that looked to me like a boil over. And the one in Macy's, that also looked to me like a boil over. So these people were on the edge of fury all the time. And it didn't take much to turn this fury into an uncontrollable physical expression. And of course, I can't talk about this without mentioning the awful killing of a 5-year-old child playing in his front garden by an incensed black neighbour of a white family. All of these examples are nothing like, for instance, what happened to Andy Ngo in June of last year, that's 2019, when he was beaten up by Antifa in Portland. He was reporting on the situation, and there was a mob behaviour against him which started with some pushing and shoving and then developed into something worse, and like a pack of out of control dogs, a sort of feeding frenzy, something like that. That was mob hysteria and a common enough phenomenon. But the 3 examples I just gave were something else altogether. They involved individuals on the edge of fury the whole time. In the last one, to just walk over into someone's garden and shoot a toddler, that requires the sort of fury you can regard as complete madness. Not, by the way, that I'm in any way giving that bastard an excuse. Now, in these 3 cases, it's important to point out that all 3 men were black. But let's hop over to another situation. Here, in this video, we have an 18-year-old who was driving a tractor which belonged to his farming family into a field. Apparently what happened was he was in one field, he was crossing the road, and he wanted to go into the other field across the road. And to do that, he was going through a line of traffic that was all held up by the Alberta police for breathalyzer tests. They were doing just a random set of breathalyzer tests. But the kid thought that since he was going from one field to the other, that, that didn't apply to him and he could just do that. When he was told to stop, he did so. And then this happened. Now, I'm sure you've seen many other situations on video of police beating up civilians all over the Western world. And I'm not talking about the George Floyd situation because, well, Floyd was high on drugs at the time. He was not cooperating and the police were restraining him. You can say that they were applying too much restraint, but you can certainly say that there was some justification, at least for the beginnings of an application of force. In this case, the case of that kid, there was no justification whatsoever. Now, the police are servants of the legal system. They get their training and their instructions from their superiors, who get their instructions from the government. We've seen the same thing over here in the UK with the attitude of the government and the police to, well, for instance, the Tommy Robinson supporters, or indeed to Tommy Robinson himself. And many people have remarked that it's as if our police or our courts or the government or even our media hate us. And by us, I mean everyday, mostly law-abiding people. Just look at what's happening in France as well, or what was happening before COVID. I'm not sure how much is going on now. So let's just go through that again. A substantial proportion of Black Americans are permanently angry with middle-class America and want to tear it down. And I believe that a group of protesters, black and white, were marching through a Portland suburb within this past few days, demanding that the homeowners turn over their houses to the poor and what they define as the disadvantaged anyway. And a substantial proportion of what you might call the establishment are also angry with the middle class, calling them racists, which nowadays means you aren't fit to live, of course. And over here, we have the BBC telling us revised and depraved versions of our national story. Some of you in the USA might have heard of a British member of parliament called Dawn Butler, who happens to be black. She tried to push a lie about being pulled over by the police in an obvious attempt to whip up some racial fury. And we can ask, why is this happening? Why are white people turning against white people and black people turning against a certain group? And I'm not referring specifically to white middle class as well, because there is a black middle class and they're getting just the same awful treatment. Because, as Biden says, if a black person doesn't have the correct attitude, then he or she ain't black. So why are we as a group hated so much? Kids running, ploughing their family fields, and families with toddlers playing in the front garden, and some guy just driving his truck through town. Why hated so much? Not only by the sort of people you might regard as being underprivileged and undereducated and thick-headed, like that guy in Macy's, but also by the people who are governing us. Well, like Trudeau or Nancy Pelosi or Emily Thornberry over here, she's an MP and quite a high flyer in the Labour Party who called the voters stupid. And she wasn't the only Labour member of Parliament with a poor opinion of voters. Gordon Brown, who was actually Prime Minister, was famously recorded disparaging a constituent as a bigot. This has been puzzling me for a while, and this is the answer I came up with. Whether it's true or not, I can't say. I can only tell you that it seems to answer some of the questions I have. There used to be an upper layer in society which did the governing. In Britain, it was often an aristocracy, or not exclusively, of course, but if someone from the middle classes rose to government, then they acted like aristocrats. And in America, there was a sort of white old family elite that did most of the governing. And they felt, in both cases, they felt that they had the right to rule. And thinking about it, most of the time, they didn't do such a bad job. Nearly all the roads we travel on, at least in Britain, and the social systems we use, the post, the telephone network, the court system, the institutions of democracy, they were all set up by those aristocratic types and elites in the 19th century. And the middle and working classes, well, we just doffed our caps and let them get on with it. But now, many of the people in government, and that semi-official government, the media, yeah, they are out of this very class, the middle class. And how can they establish their primacy over their fellow citizens? Well, they resent them because these guys can come up behind them and they're a constant threat. You know, throughout history, it's always been the case that one group has gained the upper hand and then has suppressed the rest and then has held on to power for a while, maybe a couple of generations, maybe longer, but eventually that group loses momentum and then another more vigorous group takes over. And at the moment, our own people are turning against us because they're following that instinct. It's an instinct which we can observe in apes and chimps, and it obviously goes all the way back to our common ancestor. And we've got people like Brendan O'Neill and Douglas Murray and Candace Owens and Lionel Shriver, all highly intelligent, analytical people participating in interviews and talking about the situation and analysing it very well. But they're not actually talking about the elephant in the room. And the elephant is this: we're eating ourselves because of democracy. When democracy wasn't a real democracy, but a sort of democratic elitism, it worked fairly well. But now we have progressed beyond that. And there's no hierarchical structure anymore. There's no group to which any of us owes respect. Actually, that might be why the situation in Britain is so far slightly better than it is in the USA, because there's still a little bit of aristocracy around. It's attenuated and it's still hanging on slightly. Tony Blair destroyed the House of Lords, and that was the last bastion. So I don't expect it to last for much longer. But at present, there are some echoes. But I don't think enough attention is being paid to the fact that more people hate each other now than they ever did. And I believe that they hate each other for a reason. It's not just mindless hatred. It's a general scramble to be the next elite. In this country, the media and the government hate the Tommy Robinson types because those guys are demanding their slice of power and they're not being respectful enough. I don't know where this is going to end up, quite frankly. I mentioned Lionel Shriver just before because she is the author of a novel called We Have to Talk About Kevin. And like many, well, geniuses, I think she might be a genius, she had picked up on something that will probably come more evident to historians of this period at some time in the future. always assuming there's any civilization around with historians in it by that time, of course. And what Shriver picked up on was that we all hate each other. And we're clumping into groups, dividing ourselves up like this, because, well, that's how you determine who gets into power. So what's going on is we're at the moment in a position of observing a bunch of monkeys all jockeying for position. And the only way you can justify stamping on the other people is by hating them. It's actually not a very comforting prospect. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the Graniopteryx design or Granbow with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.graniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share.